Hi, and welcome to the Luminaries In and Out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. In today's episode on the Aries Moon as the Luminary out of Sect, I speak with the one and only Kirah Tabourn. We talk about the placement of her moon in the second whole sign house, but we also talk about many other things, such as the crucial importance of Sect in delineating planets' roles and effectiveness in the birth chart, emphasizing Venus as a salve to excess Mars, Mars and Venus as emotions, fertility, astrology, and parenthood, and the role that Saturn's return can play in the relationship one has with their body and moon. We also touch upon some challenging topics in this episode, such as difficulties with food and chronic illness. So just something to keep in mind as you proceed. I also wanted to take a moment to reiterate that I recently launched a website for this podcast. There you can find information on all the episodes as well as contribute to the podcast's sustainability by becoming a supporting member or offering a one-time donation. Thank you so much to all the folks who have already supported the podcast. It really helps me in carrying out this work. The website also has information on my services. I'm currently offering natal and horary consultations on a donation basis, as well as transcription, captioning, and audio editing. I've recently done a few natal chart readings and a few horary consultations as well, and I think they went really well, and I really enjoyed doing that work. And so if you're interested in getting a reading or you have a horary question, I would really love to work with you. Please visit my website for more information about my practice. Now for my conversation with Kirah. I hope you enjoy it. Please be sure to check out the links to her website and socials below, as well as links to some of the resources that we touch on in our conversation. Kirah Tabourn, thank you so much for being with me here today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Thanks for giving me a sec to stuff my face.
Absolutely. As I said, I was doing that right before we hopped on together as well. So I definitely understand. I just want to take a minute to ask you, because there's so much monumental astrology that's happening. How has Saturn in your first been?
Oh my gosh. It has been good, I think, so far, but like definitely humbling and grounding. Like I met one of my best friends who I've known for 13 years now. I met his parents for the first time the other day, Sunday night. And like, they took us to dinner. I had a couple drinks and like, it just took me out. Like I was like puking all night. Like,
oh no.
And it wasn't even like I drank that much. I was just like, okay, I get it. Like Saturn in my first, I gotta slow down on the alcohol. I got to slow down to everything. But at the same time, it's been like, I started going to the gym again for the first time in years. And I have a trainer and I'm trying to like, I don't know, I feel the Saturnian, like you're going to stick with this for a while type of energy. So I'm hoping that sticks. And I'm going to meet up with my trainer right after this. So yeah, that part of it's been really cool.
Amazing. So just needing to be more mindful of like your interaction with intoxicants and thinking more about your body. That's cool. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for you that you can stick to your plan. I got into doing kettlebells when Mars went into Gemini, ironically. And so it's like it's in my 7th, but it's like throwing metal with your hands,
Yeah.
Very astrologer good. Cool.
I love that.
Yeah. Can you offer just like an introduction to yourself, your work, your practice, like the teachers that you've had, influences that you've had?
Sure. Yeah. So it's been a little over a decade now of me just in this whole astrology world, field, space. And I would consider myself like I say my practice is rooted in the Hellenistic tradition. And it very much is. I mean, there's certainly some modern aspects to it. I started out, like a lot of us millennial astrologers started out in the more like evolutionary, modern space, but found our way to traditional. For me, it was through the astrology podcast. Very grateful to Chris Brennan, because I certainly learned traditional astrology for free through that podcast, through that podcast. And very grateful to Chris and Kelly and Austin, Kelly Surtees, Austin Kopic, two of my biggest teachers, as well as Demetra George. I mean, Demetra, I would say, is like a humongous influence on me, as you know, she was to my teachers as well. So love Demetra. And I would also say astrologers like Charles Obert, his work has been influential on me. Jason Hawley's work has been super influential on me. And especially when it comes to one of the like primary, concepts, I think, in my practice, which is Sect. Jason's been huge. His work in Sect has been huge for my understanding of it. And Sam Reynolds is a big mentor of mine. We have creepily similar charts.
Your chart twin. Yeah.
Yeah, my chart twin. And I'm sure I'm forgetting some people, but those are, I would say, my tops. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of resonance with that. I mean, of course, the astrology podcast, I feel like I learned, it's like learning a new language. You listen to it and you're just like, I don't know what's being said, but I'm picking up words here and there. And then like seeing myself over time, like listening to the astrology podcast and being like, I don't know what's going on, to like, now I'm like, oh yeah, I get it. And reading Demetra's books has been like super foundational for me for my learning. And I mean, the whole idea behind this podcast, like focusing on the moon and embodiment in astrology, is like, has been so influenced by Jason Hawley's like exploration of myth and rethinking myth, and Sect absolutely plays into that as well. And so I feel like there's a lot of resonance there.
Definitely.
And like, I've spoken about this on past episodes, but I was really influenced by being at NORWAC 2022 and watching or being there for Jason Hawley's Sun lecture. And it's funny, whenever I talk about this question with guests, I think about kind of like your podcast and how you talk about how you know guests, because it's like you continuously talk about like NORWAC or Astro Twitter. And for me, it's like I either met guests at NORWAC or I know them from Astro Twitter. And it's really funny because I met you at NORWAC 2022, and I met you before that actually for NORWAC 21, where like people came over your house and we were like
second, I like left.
Yeah, it's funny. We were like hanging at your house, and you were like, I gotta go. But yeah, we had this nice moment at NORWAC 2022 where we like went to an Airbnb afterwards, like a bunch of us, and you and I were both really excited about like building this fire because there's a fire pit in the back. And we like I grew up making fires, and like we were talking about Vesta, and I have Vesta in my third house. And so there's this real like kind of importance of like ritual as it relates to fire. And I was like telling you about how like you have to like layer the paper and like the smaller pieces of wood and all this stuff. And and then we like helped create like this warmth that everyone gathered around at like this Airbnb. And it's a really nice memory for me in a weekend that was like really influential, because like that was kind of the start of my astrological education, like proper, going to NORWAC. So
that was such a beautiful moment, and that whole night was so special. And you mentioned the whole Vestal aspect of it, which I mean, I have Vesta and Hestia exactly conjunct my chart ruler, so definitely relate to that. And you were saying how yours is in the third, right?
Yeah,
it was that was really special. That was I'm gonna miss that.
Are you going to NORWAC this upcoming year?
No, I don't know if I'm ever going to go back.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna make it either, but we'll see.
Yeah, we need new spaces.
That's very true. That is very true. And like I feel like there's so much. Both you and I are in LA, and I do feel like it's such a beautiful place here. Like there's so much that can be done outdoors. There's so many different like environments. I feel like there's a lot of potential for like having more kind of astrology meetups.
Yeah. I mean, my chart ruler is about to enter my third house for a year. So I'm definitely planning on making some spaces, doing something, because I definitely miss it. So
Yeah, I love that. I've been thinking about Jupiter going into Taurus too, because it's both of our chart rulers and
oh right.
how that might manifest for me. Interesting. I'm interested to see what you do with Jupiter in your third. That'll
Me
be
too.
very,
Me too,
yeah.
especially with Uranus there. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, we shall see.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your childhood, and I'm curious to know your relationship with the moon, like before you were an astrologer. And if like maybe you didn't have a clear relationship, like what's one memory that comes to mind in relationship to the moon from that time?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have any, like nothing really sticks out to me besides um being really this isn't even a childhood memory, but I think just like a youth memory of where I grew up. I just remember sometimes like seeing the moonrise and being terrified, because it was
Ooh.
so big. Now I know it's like an optical illusion and all of that. But I mean, space is scary as hell in general, no matter how
Mm.
fascinating it is. And um, I just remember, I mean, maybe not so much being like afraid, but just being kind of like, awestruck by the moon, this looming figure. But yeah, I don't think I have many. I was way more into being a Scorpio when I was a kid. I was like really into, I don't know, just like the scorpion symbol. And like I just knew I was a Scorpio since I was a kid, but I
Yeah.
wasn't really tapped into anything else
Yeah.
um until I saw my birth chart really and like really got into it.
And it feels very fitting in some ways because the moon is not your luminary of sect. The sun is your luminary of sect, and the sun
Right.
is in Scorpio
Right.
with its ruler Mars. So that feels kind of right
Exactly.
in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I was in like a big Scorpio zodiacal releasing period for like my whole youth too. So yeah, that's where I was.
Mm, very
When I
cool.
learned I had an Aries moon, oh my God, I just remember my reaction being so disappointed.
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting because on the other Aries Moon episode with Tony of the Woods, I don't know if you know him from Twitter, but he was saying he was disappointed by his Aries Moon as well. So when he first learned about it, so I hope we can like show some love to the Aries
Oh yeah. I
Moons.
mean, now I'm like, it's the best moon sign, but
Okay.
but back then I was really like, I didn't get it, I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Same sort of reaction when I learned like Mars was the ruler of Scorpio and not Pluto. And now I'm like, of course it's Mars and not Pluto.
Yeah. Yeah. And so where for you, so I know that you have this story about like you saw your chart for the first time, you stayed up all night, like looking, like researching in it and stuff. Like how long
Yeah.
were you into like Pluto rules my sun, Pluto rules Scorpio before you moved into like more of a traditional Hellenistic like framework?
It was about 2 years. Honestly, it was the Saturn transit through my ninth house was like my
Mm,
initial entry into everything. And then it was Saturn and Sag that Chris started putting out more consistent episodes of this. I was there from the beginning, not to
mm,
brag.
yeah.
But no, I just remember like Chris putting out more consistent. I just remember it so vividly. Like all of a sudden
Mm,
he's like doing this, he's making more episodes. And I just remember I had a friend that I made online on Reddit. And it wasn't through an astrology subreddit. It was like I saw her commenting on something, essentially defending astrology on some like
mm,
general subreddit. And I messaged her being like, wow, I never see anyone, defending astrology. This was back in 2013. So we had become like internet friends and we would talk a lot. And
yeah.
at some point, she switched to equal sign houses. So I switched to it to check it out. And then it was, yeah, Chris, some of his episodes that made me get into whole sign and, just open up the world of traditional where everything really started to make sense. And it just felt so right. My Mercury's in Sag too. So it really like I just remember the very palpable feeling of like Saturn, the consolidation factor of like Saturn coming to my Mercury, and all of the astrology that I had known before, like starting to actually make sense, basically.
Yeah. And that's so interesting too, with like your MC there, like the astrology podcast, and like that kind of coalescing with Saturn through Sag having such an important role in your professional life ultimately.
Yeah, unexpectedly too. It the way it all happened was so like, okay, I guess this is happening. Like it kind of happened to me, and I couldn't like resist it, you know. It's kind of fun.
And one more thing on this, because I'm interested, like was there a time when you were like, oh yeah, Neptune rules my ascendant?
No.
No, you're always like a
No, I
you're
guess
always for
not.
Jupiter.
I guess not. I guess there had to have been a time, but I don't think I was thinking of like chart rulers at that point.
Right. Yeah.
I don't think that was a concept that was like in my brain. So I just like, I don't even remember, like, yeah, I'm like, did I even care about Neptune that much? I must have cared a little bit, but I think it was more of the fact that I had this Neptune Uranus North Node conjunction. Like I always like pull them together.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good question though, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Awesome. So today, like, what's your relationship with the moon today? And why do you think it's important for us to focus on the moon when we talk about astrology or do astrological practice?
Yeah. Well, my relationship with the moon today is like developing one. Because I am, you know, self-proclaimed diurnal bitch. Like I'm so day chart. I'm so day sect. Even though, you know, my night sect planets are pretty strong. My Venus and Mars are in domicile, but you know, I'm ruled by Jupiter. I have this ninth house sun, all of that, super strong Saturn. And so it's taken, I think, to get like getting through my Saturn return to really understand like what I need to take care of myself body wise. I don't really think of the moon as emotions at all anymore. Like it just doesn't even go. For me, it's like Venus and Mars are emotions. And yeah, when I think of the moon, I think of but my moon specifically, it rules my fifth house. It rules my part of fortune. It's my Almutin, all the things. And so it's really, I can't think about the moon without thinking about my future, my unborn children, you know, and
yeah.
And
understandably with that fifth house, that Cancer fifth house.
That's what the moon means to me personally, like in my chart. And and everything I do for my moon is like for my kids, you know? And yeah, it's very much tied to that for me, like this potential of motherhood and having very, you know, Aries moon like children that I've kind of been focused on for a long time. So, you know, the North Node's about to enter Aries, and Jupiter just transited my moon a week ago or so. And, you know, Venus recently transited my moon, and Chiron's been transiting my moon. And I all of a sudden the past like 3-4 weeks was like, yeah, I gotta freeze my eggs. Like I gotta freeze my eggs.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking I'll probably do that when the North Node is on my moon or around my moon. But yeah, that's been my like thoughts about the moon lately. It's just like, okay, I gotta get her healthy enough to get some eggs and, you know, prepare for having kids eventually. I've always known that kids is going to be a very expensive thing for me, with the moon being my second house and me wanting to do IVF no matter what. Because I have a genetic disease and I don't want that my kids to have it. So it already involves like egg retrieval and all of that. So I'm like, I might as well just do that now.
That's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking about what the moon represented for you, because I think the difference that we can talk about with modern and Hellenistic is like this idea that in modern that the whole chart represents you and your internal landscape and what have you. And in Hellenistic, it's more kind of like other planets in the chart can represent other people and whatnot. And I'm reminded of my conversation with Kirah Moon, and she has a second house moon as well in Pisces. And she talked about her mom being the breadwinner. And so it's like very much a representation of like the mother making money. And but it's interesting to hear that like you look at yourself as the mother in relation to your moon. And that does make so much sense in reference to that fifth house, being Cancer ruled by the moon, like the fifth house of children. And it feels really interesting the way that you are thinking about it, this like kind of long range or long-term planning that you have, because I feel like we're jumping around a little bit, but it's okay. Because you have Mars in Scorpio in the ninth, ruling that moon in the second. And I feel like Mars in Scorpio is this very strategic planning, like thinking ahead kind of placement and what have you. And it's interesting too to think about that planning around worldview ruling the moon in the second, which who rules the fifth. And so there's this kind of like very strategic thinking around childbearing as you're talking about.
Super, like I've been thinking about this for a long time. And also I'll say my moon is like partile square Neptune. And so, I've been getting really into fertility astrology and reading Nicola Smuts-Alsop's book, Fertility Astrology and all of that. And it's not a great thing to have moon Neptune contact when it comes to fertility, but it often speaks to just having a very romanticized, view of motherhood and of, even childbirth and childbearing. And I will say, like, since I was a baby, like since I was an infant, have been obsessed with birth. And I would watch birthing videos. I still do. I haven't like gone into the realm of, becoming a doula or anything, but I've just always been really into both like pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting and parenthood. Like, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the moon being a really important planet in my chart, but that. And then I'll also say like the other thing not associated with, fertility and babies, it's just like creativity in general for me. Right. Like that's when I'm having like moon transits or activations, like it's me at my most creative, and I'm just getting so many ideas, and I'm just like, let's go, let's make all the things. My Aries moon gets very like, let's do it, let's make it.
And so one thing I want to say first is for anybody that's curious, Chris did an astrology podcast episode with the astrologer that you're referring to about fertility astrology. I'll link it in the show notes. It's a super good episode.
And a great book.
Okay, yeah, and a great book as well. I was fascinated by the conversation, and I think it's really interesting if anybody kind of is interested in that or like needs to consult with somebody who has those skills. Like it seems like its own particular kind of astrology with its own particular kind of rules and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like just starting to dip my toes. I'm actually prepping for a consult tomorrow to try to get into it, because more people need to know it, and she's trying to teach it. So yeah, if anyone is interested, definitely check out that episode in her book.
Amazing. In all of the episodes I've had with the fire moons, I've only had 4 so far, Sag moons and the Aries moons. I have a Sag moon, and so I'm reminded of Erin Tech Shipley and I kind of talking about like the buoyancy that comes with Jupiter ruling the Sag moon, but also just with the fire element, there's a kind of quickness to it, or there's like with the mutability, there's this kind of motion that can happen. And it's interesting to hear you talk about like not thinking about the moon as a motion. And it's like, I'm curious how Aries plays into that, the kind of cardinal fire aspect. And is it like is it just that the emotions come and go so quickly, or why do you look at Mars and Venus more as emotions rather than the moon?
Yeah, that's a good question. I should unpack it. um yeah, I think part of it is the fact that they do come and go so quickly for me as an Aries moon. It's hard because I am a Scorpio, and it all is ruled by that Mars and Scorpio with Pluto, that I definitely hold on to shit, but I do feel like yeah, an Aries moon, it's like picking it up and putting it down, it's very fast. Um, you can burn through feelings really quickly, I guess. And I guess I associate Venus and Mars more with feelings or emotions. I think I almost just feel like it's based on those like transits or activations of those planets feel more connected to emotional, seasons or aspects of my life than the moon. I feel like sure I can, I feel like moon transits for me as an Aries moon just correlate more to like body stuff. I don't know. It just feels
Yeah.
like maybe it is emotional, but it's like moving through, it just feels more physical to me. And maybe there is just a more instinctual connection with like emotions in my body, where it's like I'm experiencing them through my body and not even rationally thinking about them as emotions. I don't know. But I will say, like, again, as a diurnal girl, I tend to like not pay attention to the moon stuff that much. I try,
Interesting.
especially with food, like it's been a journey. It still is a journey of me figuring out how to feed myself and staying on top of just food. I've had an appetite problem for the past 10 years, and I don't have like a naturally occurring appetite essentially. And it's been a hard time figuring out how to like deal. I say, see, even the way I'm talking about it, deal with my body.
Yeah.
I told my dietitian the other day, like, she was just like, oh my God, Kirah. Cause I was just like, no, I get really frustrated with the fact that I have to eat, like I've heard other Aries moons say this too, but it's such a burden to me to like have to keep my body fueled and then have to like rest, like have to sleep.
Yeah.
I could get so much more done if I didn't have to eat or sleep, and that's such an Aries moon thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like we've we're moving kind of all around, but I think that one thing I want to know is like just if we could break down the sign of Aries a little bit. Just curious, like what does it mean to you? What are some keywords that come to mind? And how do considerations of myth or story, if at all, play into your understanding of both your experience of the moon and the sign of Aries?
Yeah, that's a good question. With Aries, I always go back to like an initial spark, the spark that starts everything, the big bang, if you will. It's like it's the friction necessary to get things going. And it's the just do it slogan, it's like don't think, just act. It's all about instinct to me, and initiation essentially. Whenever I think about Aries or Scorpio or Mars, I always go back to something Austin Coppock once said on the astrology podcast. I'm pretty sure. I don't know. It was probably like over a decade ago at this point. I don't know. But but he said with Mars, it's like Aries is the daytime warrior, the daytime Mars, and Mars is Scorpio is a nocturnal or nighttime Mars. And so when I always like to think about the comparison between the two sort of aspects of Mars. And with Aries, it is so much about, being there in the flesh and having to make these split second decisions, having to totally be embodied and relying on your instincts. And there's not time to think when you're on the battlefield and, there's being spears or whatever, you're being shot at. Like, you just have to move and you have to do. And that's what I think about with Aries. And I also think about another thing Austin said once around, just relating it to the animal, the ram, and how rams, like, they kind of how they ram people or whatever. They like get all their energy, and then they expend it all at once in one, in one go. And that stuck with me so much because he kind of was talking about how like Aries is not meant for like long-term work. It's not, it's a spurt of energy and then they crash.
Right.
And so when I have clients with Aries moons, I often talk about that because I'm like, we have to plan for burnout, like I tell my clients, like, think about your Aries moon as like a very hyperactive 5-year-old with like ADHD, right? Just a hyper 5-year-old. That by the end of the day, that kid is going to burn out. And so you need
if
to
not
be
earlier.
able to, or if not earlier, exactly,
Yeah.
a couple times throughout the day. Yeah. You need to be able to plan for that, right? Like, that's what taking care of your Aries moon is, like, making sure you have snacks, making sure that there's time for nap time, right? Because it's like, we're going to burn out, period. There's not like avoiding that. So yeah, that's something I think about, is like the burnout factor with Aries, and how we have to keep, reigniting our flames.
One thing I want to mention in relation to that, I don't know if you saw this video. Someone on social media shared this in relation to Aries, but it was a video of two rams, like basically in a duel. And they were like, you could see they were both like revving up, and then they like run really fast at each other and knock horns. And then they just stand there and they're done. Like, they don't even, it just like happens one time and then it's over. They're like, they almost like glitch out or something. And I felt like that was such an interesting representation of Aries as a sign, where it's like the flamethrower that just goes and is gone.
Yeah. And if you think about like an Aries, if you ever see an Aries, like, yell about something or get upset about something or even be excited about something, it's like they have the burst of energy and then they're chilling. So yeah. And then I guess in terms of myth,
or just like stories, like Aries stories that come to mind.
I mean, yeah, I think I like to think often about, Aries in contrast to Venus, or Mars, Venus, Aries, Aphrodite, whatever. And again, how, of the night sect, they kind of are, two sides to the same coin in a lot of ways, love, war, love, hate, that type of thing. And I like to think about how Venus, about just the whole Venus Mars attraction, and how, Venus kind of can soften Mars, and Mars can, kind of drive Venus crazy. I don't know. I often think about that with Aries, and maybe it's because, I have Venus in Libra, and Aries placements tend to drive me crazy like that. I don't know. But yeah, just the whole like desire element to Aries, and just going after what you want, and how like charming that can be. I often think about Bernie Sanders and his Aries moon with Mars and Aries too, and how he's just like so real, and that's why people love him, because he's not bullshitting anyone about anything. He's just like, this is how it is, and I think that's a really charming that can be a really charming aspect to Aries too.
This really reminds me, I don't know if you're familiar with Esther Perel, but it reminds me of her book, Mating in Captivity. And I haven't finished it, but basically this idea is like a very Venus Mars story, where she's talking about like long-term relationships and attraction, and how successful couples basically like keep some kind of separation between them to kind of like keep because she talks about this tension between like safety and excitement, which feels very like Venus Mars, you know,
Exactly.
of like you need safety, but you can't have complete safety because then there's this need for individuation in relationships, and there needs to be some kind of separation for that to happen. And I feel like that's very much that kind of like Mars Venus tension. And it's interesting with Mars and Venus being of the same sect, but both of their signs are opposing each other, you know, in the zodiac. And like I was just listening to the Pisces episode, and was reminded of the astrology podcast, and I was reminded of this idea of like oppositions are not aversions. Like aversions, like you can't see the other thing and you almost like don't recognize it. But with oppositions, there's almost like it's almost like the yin yang symbol, where there's like a little bit of the other thing inside of you. Like there's a resonance, but as you said, like it's of the opposite, the two sides of the same coin kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The resonance with like, they're of the same sect, you know, that type of thing, the same or complementary elements. But yeah, but then it's like, the oppositions are so interesting to me because it is so much like you get the full view, you know, it's so confronting to stand opposite someone and take them in, and the distance allowing for clarity, essentially. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm working on a dating app right now and creating an algorithm.
Cool.
And my whole like, you know, I'm talking to the team about I'm fixing their algorithm, making a new one basically. And talking to them about how like any aspect is better than no aspect, you know? And yeah, you might think that like a square is bad or an opposition is bad, but it's so much better than an aversion and not being able to see at all. Right. So yeah, I just love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I think sect is interesting too. And it makes me think about like the malefics in sect. And I feel like we've been talking about this a little bit because like we place Mars in the night sect because that's what alleviates the extremity of Mars. But then there's this oppositional relationship between Venus and Mars, who are sect mates, and like the moon and like the Mars can like harm the moon. You know, I feel like there's this kind of it's slipping my mind, but I feel like there's like a textual thing about the moon and Mars being kind of like not liking each other. And so there's this interesting thing I think about sect where I really think a lot about like the malefics and what they like, quote unquote, because it's like Mars does like, you know, it's like the malefics can joy by gender, for lack of a better term, or by sect, where it's like Mars is alleviated in a like a water sign, like a nocturnal sign, but then it's like that doesn't mean it doesn't like to be in Aries, for example, or to be in a fire sign where it's like, oh, I have more energy,
right?
To, you know, like those kinds of more,
yeah. Mars is so interesting when it comes to sect too, especially I think about, yes, it's definitely tempers, you know, the night tempers Mars's excess heat. But also thinking about how that excess heat might be, you know, really nice for the night sect as well. So things don't get too frigid with Saturn, right? And yeah, how Mars is sort of and a night chart can be the defender of the chart and really like use that like the skill of Mars, all the skills of Mars, you know, in a way that's a lot more productive. Yeah. And I was just, my client I had before this it's a Scorpio rising with Mars and Aries in a night chart. And I just love, I feel like a night chart Mars especially is so of the people, you know, like really is like defender of their realm and of their like of their people, you know, of their community. I just find yeah, just the whole nocturnal, and also just, Mars under the horizon, and how Mars just tends to do well in that part of the chart, in terms of like
Right.
holding it down for their people.
Right. Yeah. And like, so if your client, for example, anybody with a Scorpio rising, Aries is the sixth whole sign house, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the sixth whole sign house is like Mars, the house of its joy. And so
Exactly.
it is a place that um, Mars really does like to be, that place where, you know, uh, you can have different significations for the sixth house. Like you can have illness. But I do think that kind of like the labor component comes in as well with
Mm-hmm.
Mars. It's like Mars likes to take action. And I feel like, I don't know, that resonates for me with the sixth house joy for Mars.
Exactly. Yeah. And this person is a labor organizer and community organizer. And, yeah, that's the work that they do, is a lot of community organizing work. So
That's perfect.
literally, and it's like, yeah, you're the type of person. I always think of like Mars and Aries, especially when it's beneath the horizon, as like in a night chart, um, as the like first responders, or like frontline
Mm,
defenders, like just so good at being there when shit goes down, like
yeah.
those are the people that are like that you want in any sort of crisis, that you want in the ER, the
Hmm.
overnight nurses, all of that. Like these night chart Marses are just so good for that.
Yeah. Really leading the charge, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, so you mentioned that you're a diurnal girly. So let's talk about the relationship of your sun and your moon and
Yeah.
how lunar phase plays into your experience of your moon.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm such a waxing gibbous lunar girly.
Tell me about it.
I mean, I was born like 3 days, I think, 2 or 3 days before full moon.
Hmm.
And I know the full moon girlies. I went to school with someone who was born a couple of days after me with that Taurus moon. And yeah, I mean, I'm just so happy I had the Aries moon. No offense. It's just
Mm,
the like, I don't know, being ruled, having my sun and moon both ruled by Mars is a trip, of course. But I think it works so well with the waxing gibbous phase of just like the preparation. And I just feel like the waxing gibbous is like the excitement, like before, like building up to the party,
right,
and
right.
that's me. Like I am a party planner, like I just
Uh-huh.
love to plan. I love to like get ready. I love the
Yeah.
build up. And so it just fits me so well. And yeah, having Scorpio sun, Aries moon, both planets, both luminaries ruled by my extremely strong out of sect malefic.
Hmm.
It's not easy, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's definitely not easy. And I feel like I have very Martian parents with that too. Both my parents have Scorpio placements, and pretty strong Mars placements. But yeah, I don't know. It's made me a fighter in a lot of ways, and
Mm,
it gives me like my like spunk and my bite that I don't know. It's just who I am, I guess.
yeah. Perseverance maybe as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a lot of that. I feel like, all of it coming back to the Mars in the ninth house. And then, it's kind of hard to think about Mars without thinking about the sun and Pluto there too.
Right.
And it kind of all comes back to this like extreme thirst for like knowing,
Mm,
and knowledge. And yeah, I've had like psychics. Like I've had so many people tell me like, without me even saying anything to them, they're just like, you don't have to know everything, right?
mm,
And I'm like, no, but I do. But it's like a trauma response or something where I'm just like, knowing will save me, like
yeah.
that's the
Mm,
that's kind of what drives me. I don't rationally think that,
yeah.
but that is why I became obsessed with astrology. Like, absolutely, you know, it's definitely issues with control and just like needing to know to try to prepare somehow. So yeah, I think that's where the out of sect part of Mars comes in for me, is like it's way overdoing. It's already burning so high. It's combust as fuck. It's conjunct Pluto, you know, it's like, and I've heard also if you're born with during a waxing moon in a day chart, it makes Mars even like hotter, you know, so
right, because that moon is hot too.
exactly,
right?
yeah, and being ruled by that Mars, and so yeah, it just my does too much, and like the hardest parts of life is like trying to rein that in and like control the Mars element of things, because it's ruling my eyes, you know, it's ruling how I see everything, my sun and my moon. So yeah.
And do you have any suggestions for anybody that maybe identifies with that, with the Aries moon?
Yeah, when it comes to like overdoing, basically, I think well, something I've been trying to do a lot more lately is, you know, I have the opposition to my Venus in Libra. And I often talk about Venus as an antidote to, you know, excess Mars. And I've been, you know, I'm in a Venus in Libra year this year. It's my perfection year. And I'm trying to make a concerted effort to lean on try not to do everything by myself, basically. Because Aries moons, we really think we can do it all. We like really, really, really think we can do it all, like forever. And or at least we try to, even if we know we can't. And so I try to tell other Aries moons, like, just fucking ask for help, or not even, you don't even have to ask usually, because people are often offering it. We just say no. So just accept the help, and lean into, like, you know, companionship, and allowing others to kind of shoulder some of your burdens in some ways, because it feels really good, and it's good for you.
So kind of like look to your Venus placement and the house and the signs that, or the house's Venus rules in your chart, for maybe some more about how that kind of individuates for you.
Yeah, exactly. How you do Venus, how you might cool down. Because for me, doing Venus is very relational, and it's like listening to music with my loved ones, but it could be different for other people.
Yeah, I'm struck by so many things that you're saying. One, the first thing that comes to mind, I'll just mention, we don't have to get into it, but we both have very strong benefics out of Sect in the 8th house, which I think is really interesting. Mine's also my chart ruler, but
the Jupiter in Cancer.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting. Like, you know, I feel like that can manifest in what you're saying with like Venus in the 8th in Libra, like letting other people like give you their resources of like their help and their energy and, you know, what have you, their support. So that feels like really fitting. And then the other thing I was going to mention was I really relate to this idea of like, I need to know everything. And I feel like it's gotten better over time. But, you know, your 9th house ruler also rules the 2nd, and my ruler of the 9th, my sun is in the 2nd house. And also my sun is conjunct my out of sect malefic, Saturn.
Okay. And it's your out of sect luminary.
And it's my out of sect luminary. Which is a little different. But I really feel like this idea of like that kind of all that knowledge that you want from the 9th house, like being in the 2nd. And I'm reminded of Diana Rose Harper's like 1st house, 2nd house workshop that she did, where she has this idea of like your 1st house is like your existential needs, and your 2nd house can be so many different things, like, you know, the work that you do, your livelihood, whatever, but it's like the things that support those existential needs. And so I feel like for me, there's like a real resonance there of like knowing things will support me as a person, like getting by in the world. So
yeah, I definitely resonate with that. That makes a lot of sense.
Any other aspects that the moon makes in your chart that you think would be important to discuss?
I'll just say my moon makes a lot of aspects and I like it a lot. I like my
She's busy.
moon. She's pretty busy. She's separating from an opposition with Venus, and a partile square with Neptune, which is also separating from like Uranus. I have partile Uranus Venus square. So it's like moon, Uranus, Neptune, North Node, Venus. The
Mm.
moon is like very much at the bendings in my chart.
Mm.
And also applying to trine Mercury, which is one of my favorite aspects of my chart that I
That
actually don't
sounds so
really think about
nice.
a lot.
Yeah.
I just like having that fire trine. I think it's yeah, probably my favorite part of my chart when I think about it, because it really just like gives me like my spark, you know. Um and I also like it because, you know, when I think about eventually I'll meet someone and have kids, um and the moon ruling my fifth house trine my seventh house ruler, you
Mm.
know, it just feels really nice.
Yeah, that
um
sounds really
yeah,
sweet,
I feel
actually.
like my kids will like their other parent.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that's something. Yeah, the moon Mercury trine. And I really love Aries season, and when planets move through fire signs in general and like light up that trine for me, it's all very like, it's always very like career oriented for me, but
Hmm.
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting if we think about applications of the moon as like bringing into being or being into fruition the planet that it's applying to. You have this like tight trine with Mercury, as you said. And it's interesting. I was noticing looking at your chart how Mercury is really involved in term rulership in your chart, like your
Mm-hmm.
MC,
Yeah.
your Venus, your moon.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really interesting. I wonder if you have any thoughts on like Mercury's role. I know Mercury also rules Mercury also rules your chart ruler. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like added.
Yeah. It's really annoying to have Mercury and Sag having such a huge role. I think, especially because it's out of sect, it's a nocturnal Mercury.
Hmm.
And, you know, it feels like it's like that's my ADHD, you know.
Mm.
It's just like such a distracted planet. And there's just, you know, a lot going on. The moon's kind of like feeding into it. But yeah, I do at the same time, you know, I have to kind of submit to it. You know, Mercury, yeah, is a term ruler for so many of my planets, and it's in its own term on
Hmm.
the midheaven. So yeah, learning about that over the past couple of years has really um just made a lot make sense to me, in terms of like, dude, it's like you're just not, things aren't going to look the same for you. Like they're not going to look like everyone else does it, you know? And it's just
Mm.
really already coming to terms with that, with having my chart ruler in detriment, and then having, you know, its ruler in detriment, but then having Mercury kind of like, you know, a lot of planets answering to that Mercury. That's kind of
Hmm.
accidental dignity, you know, on the midheaven. um it just kind of has to show up and perform. And it's very much like, you know, my favorite way of working or showing up is to just like come and talk, you know, like I don't like to
Yeah.
prepare anything. Deadlines are my worst enemy. I'm a week late in turning in horoscopes that I'm still working on. Like I love to show up to a microphone or to a space and just, you know, do the Mercury and Sag like talking thing.
Mm.
So yeah, that's
Awesome.
somehow I think I might have answered your question.
Yeah, you definitely did. Yeah, that's really cool. It's awesome. I mean, it's just always really interesting to see how like these things like mutual reception and like planet being in detriment, but having like all this dignity being right on an angle, like all how all that stuff plays out.
I will just say, to kind of close that out, is like, you know, my chart ruler is in the seventh house on the descendant, and it's ruled by that Mercury. And other people are like everything to me. My
Right.
relationships are everything, you know,
Mm.
like every time I have an idea for anything, I'm just like, who can I partner with? You know,
Awesome.
I'm just such a other partner relationship oriented person. And I think that really comes out with like that Mercury placement too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. So you talked about how like cycles of the moon affect your body rather than your emotional life. And I was hoping if you could like elaborate a little bit more on like what you found with moon transits in relation to that.
Yeah. I feel like I think especially when I notice it when planets are transiting my moon, it's always something physical. Um, and also I would say, now that I think about it, my fifth house, moon rules my fifth house. And I always plan my dates and sex hookups around the moon.
Nice.
It's like imperative, there's just certain moon transits where I know I'm like it's not gonna happen.
Uh-huh.
Or like the sex won't be good because I've just planned it. I just notice it that much.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that is one thing where like the moon in relation to my body especially comes out.
Mm.
It's like Pisces moon is like my favorite moon in my first house, Pisces risings. If you're listening to this, Pisces moon transits are great for sex. I don't
Yeah.
know now that Saturn's there, who knows? But that, and then, Cancer moon transit, stuff like that, where it's like, and then when the moon's like aspecting your natal moon or things like that. But yeah, I always look at that. And then I would say, yeah, when, I've been having this Chiron transit to my moon. And that's been really interesting body wise too. I think
Mm.
it's coincided really well with like my Saturn return ending and Saturn entering my first and just like paying more attention to my body. And how I'm feeding myself and, what I'm ingesting, things like that. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think about like, yeah. And then when it comes to just moon transits in general, it's like, you know, I think all astrologers kind of know at this point when you're having an especially rough day and you just like look at the chart and you're like, oh, yeah, the moon's like opposing Mars, or,
Mm-hmm.
there was the Mars or the moon, Uranus, Saturn T square or something, like
Mm.
you can kind of see.
The other day with the moon, like that little void in Pisces, I
Oh,
was like, oh
God,
my God, dude, what the
horrible.
fuck?
It
This
was
is,
so bad.
it was so bad.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
with Mars, I cannot wait till Mars and Saturn aren't angular to each other anymore.
Mm.
But yeah, things like that. It's like it's so, and I always feel it so physically. It's always such a physical experience for me. Like, yeah, I might be feeling shitty, but it's like, mentally or emotionally, but usually it's like, and that's why I can't eat, or
Mm-hmm.
and my stomach's like killing me because I'm like super anxious about something. So it always kind of comes into the physical.
Yeah, I just like looking at your moon, it's really interesting because my IC is right there. And so I've been having the same kind of transit with Chiron, like on my IC, which is definitely
Mm-hmm.
manifested like a lot differently. But yeah, it's just interesting to hear someone having like a similar transit, but to a different point in their chart, a different planet in their chart.
Yeah. But it
Cool
is
to,
kind of similar in ways too.
yeah,
Just,
like the moon does
yeah,
kind of have this like maternal, like,
rooted, like where you come from,
yeah, like
sort of.
I'm reminded of Ari Felix talking about like your ancestors living inside of you and like this
Hmm.
idea of the moon as embodiment. And like that feels very, very resonant.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Because for me, it's been like getting in touch with my ancestors and like starting an ancestral practice. And
Hmm. Yeah. Do you find, I mean, sure, I'm sure you do. A lot of people do the connection to like your mother with the moon as well.
well, it's really interesting. I talked about this with Erin when she was on the podcast, but both my mom and I have Sag moons.
Hmm.
And so there's like that kind of lunar resonance. I have moon in the first, and she's a Gemini rising, so she has moon in the seventh. So like I've definitely had a very close relationship with my mom, and I can definitely see in my chart how the moon can be me, but can also speak to uh things my mother has experienced as well, which is
Yeah.
really interesting, like the fractal nature of
Absolutely.
things.
I look at my moon as my mom so much too. And my sister and I both have second house moons. Hers is Scorpio, so both ruled by Mars.
Ooh,
And we also both have ninth house suns, which is interesting too.
interesting.
Hers is Gemini, but it's yeah, it always sticks out to me that we both have this like Mars ruled second house moon, and we have a very different but also kind of similar experience of our moms.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like I'm oldest, I'm my mom's first, and so for me, I feel like my mom treats me more like a sibling than a kid a lot
Oh,
of the
interesting.
times. But I think about my mom's a Sag, so she's very fiery.
Mm-hmm.
She has an Aquarius moon, but she's super fiery, and I always relate my Aries moon to her. And the one thing that I think my sister and I share in terms of our perspective of our mom is like the money aspect of things. And
Mm.
I don't think she made like a lot more than my dad necessarily, but she was just always working, always hustling. She still does. Like they're basically retired, but she's just like learning about day trading and stocks now. And she's
Wow.
just like always, on her hustle. And
So funny. I'm reminded of you sharing that picture of a stack of books, and you're like, what kind of Mercury does my mom have? And I was like, I fucking know, because I have the same Mercury. I know.
the Mercury and Cap. It was like
Yeah.
all these like money success oriented books.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also just the fact that my mom, I wouldn't call her a hoarder, but my mom likes she's kind of a shopaholic, and
Mm.
I certainly get that from her. I think my sister does too. My sister doesn't shop as much as like just kind of hoard.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like I think about my mom, I think about like, a million shoe boxes in her room, and like she just loves shopping.
Yeah.
And that second house moon, I certainly got it from her.
Mm. Yeah. I think about, so I'll say, like, I think about the connection or the disconnection between Sag and Scorpio, like, quite a lot. Like, I was just posting the other day on Twitter about the Antisha episode that you did with on your podcast, and how the fixed signs do not have connection to the other modalities. Like, they just have this reinforced connection with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I just think about, like, I have no connection to my 12th house being a Sag rising, like in terms of the aspects between them, because there's just like it's just a complete aversion. And it's
Mm-hmm.
interesting to think about you and your sister's relationship with your mom, because your moon is trine your mom's sun, you would say. But I would imagine there might be some, I don't know, because, like, for example, I have a Sag moon, and I think my dad had a Scorpio moon, and we had like this kind of quiet closeness with each other, but
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't that same kind of, like, I don't know, my relationship with my mom with the same kind of moon is like definitely very different. So
Yeah, I feel like, my dad's a Scorpio sun like me,
mm,
and my mom's a Sag sun, my sister's a Gemini sun. So I always felt like my sister and my mom had a more like relatable relationship. Like they just
interesting.
get along pretty well. They
Interesting.
always have. Whereas like, and it's because they can kind of keep things light and fun and bubbly, and
Mm,
Sad's Gemini, and like they just laugh, and.
nice.
And I think my mom gets really annoyed with, our Scorpio. My mom has Venus in Scorpio. She's not immune, but my dad and I are both Scorpio suns. My sister's a Scorpio moon, and I think my mom can get really annoyed or dragged down by how like heavy we can be,
Mm-hmm.
um, and like serious. I think sometimes it can be,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I don't know. The fact that both my mom and we both have Scorpio and Sag placement, so I think there's a lot of familiarity, but again, our relationship is so much more like peer to peer. I feel like it's become that way over time. Like I think it kind of always was that way in a lot of ways ever since I probably like didn't need her help with like basic things. I don't know.
Mm,
Um and Yeah, it's just a little different. You know, my sister's her baby, even though she's
Yeah.
turning 29.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The birth order can really make a big difference in a
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, I feel like the Scorpio Sag connection is really, I always think about it too, because you know, my parents, I was raised by a Scorpio Sag couple, and their dynamic is so interesting in that, like, yeah, my my mom is like so much more outgoing and like, I wouldn't say like super, she is still Venus and Scorpio, but she's
Mm-hmm.
just more willing to do stuff and like hang out. And, you know, my dad is literally like hangs out in the basement. Like that's his, he's like a
Real
basement dweller.
big Scorpio energy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big Scorpio energy. And that's always been topic of like discord between them because my dad's just like, why do you want to go hang out with your cousins? Like, stay here.
If
It's
only your
such a
mom could be
Scorpio.
like, if only your mom could be like, I'm a Sag son, don't you
Yeah,
know?
literally,
Yeah.
literally. Um, yeah.
It's so
So
funny how in families that like these placements can repeat themselves, like through generations and even within like one family, like placements can just
exactly.
keep showing up.
And then you have people like me who choose people's birthdays. I've chosen my friends' babies' birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I choose them based on the patternings that's already in the family.
Mm.
And just trying to kind of replicate what I feel like what normally, you know, naturally happen.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's always interesting to think about family patterning and how things just like keep
So
repeating.
just to be clear, like so basically like your friends, you help them elect the birth time, like the birthday and time of their
Not
babies.
the time.
Okay, just the
I would
day.
never do the time. Yeah. I mean, it's only when they have a planned C-section. And so
Right.
I've only done it a couple of times. So my one friend, I did it with both of her kids. So she just
Mm-hmm.
had her son on the Capricorn new moon. I elected for them. And yeah, basically just looking for commonalities, you know, what would make sense within the family unit.
Mm.
But I never do the
Super
time.
interesting. Any particular reason?
I mean, it's not really up to me.
Right. I mean, they usually schedule most C-sections like kind of early in the morning, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just sort of like, you know, they're probably going to be 12th house babies. And
Mm.
yeah, they both have 12th house luminaries. The Capricorn new moon one is like 12th house Capricorn stellium.
Oh my
But, you know,
gosh.
mom has a 12th house sun too. So it makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah, so they might be have that 12th house resonance with their parent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's special.
Yeah.
Cool. Super cool. So any other suggestions that you have for someone new to astrology or planetary relationship and forming or initiating relationships with the moon or any planet?
Yeah, you know, I'm such a sucker for sects. I'm like learn sect, you know, because it really does shape your understanding of your chart and like a totally and of the planets and how they work.
Mm-hmm.
Um because yeah, your insect planet they're just it's so important to understand, I think, especially when it comes to the luminaries and like which luminary is the more dominant like light, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what eye are you seeing out of more clearly, essentially?
Right.
um and I think it's just, yeah, it'll kind of make everything else click into place a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
um and I have a podcast episode about sect too with Jason Hawley.
Amazing.
um and yeah, that was season
Mm.
2, episode 1, I believe, and of the astrology show. I'm launching my new podcast has a new name, but
Okay, cool.
yeah, that's something I would say. Um,
Any other resources on Sect you'd like to suggest? I
yeah,
feel like
I'm trying to
that's a
think.
really good episode. I remember listening to that and getting
Thanks.
a lot out of it.
Yeah, Jason has. I think he has, you know, talks and stuff on
Mm-hmm.
Sect too. And then there was a podcast episode Chris did with, I don't remember who he did it with, but he did an episode on Sect. It might have been solo,
Okay.
I don't remember. But he did a full episode on Sect that was really good. Um, yeah, one of my most like the thing that one of the things that made it click for me the most was I was talking to Austin Coppock once. It must have been like an online call or something. So this isn't like a resource anywhere, but I'll just share to you what he told me. And this is therefore informed my teaching on Sect too. Because I was asking him about my Sun Mars conjunction and basically being like, who has it worse, the Sun or Mars? You know, like who's harming who here? And he didn't really answer my question, but but he did talk to me about how he talked to someone. He was like, yeah, I was talking, I don't remember who it was, talking to someone at a conference about sect and how the word sect, another translation for it could have been shift. And so he kind of made this analogy around or metaphor, I don't know the right word, around like clocking in for a shift, right? Like at Taco Bell. I like to use Urban Outfitters because I used to work at Urban Outfitters. But you know, there's the day shift. There's people who come in at 7 a.m. and you know, start the day. And then there's the night shift, people who come in at like 8 p.m. and work throughout the night, and how those two different shifts are going to have totally different ways of operating. And the managers for those shifts are going to have different ways of managing, right? The team lead, the sect light for those shifts are going to have different perspectives on how they're doing things. And so I really loved that. And I thought it just translated so well when you're thinking about, you know, your chart, your birth chart, and the two sects. And the way I like to explain it now is like, you know, the sects, the planets that are in sect or of the sect, essentially it's like, it's their shift and they're working, you know, and they're like on it, they're on the clock. They have directives and goals, and they, you know, they're working towards things. And it feels like that's appropriate. That's in your favor, right? But the planets that are out of sect, it's almost as if like it's not their shift. So like, why are you expecting me to work? Like I clocked out, you know what I mean?
They're like, wait, where do you put that again? Like,
yeah. Or they don't really care, you know, they're distracted. They have other things that they're thinking about and doing, because it's like, they're not on the clock. Right. So I often like to think about that. And I think it just really helps put sect in perspective when you're thinking about your planets and how they're operating. Like thinking about my Venus in the 8th house, out of sect, benefic. I always like to say, like, you know, Venus in Libra brings me a lot of beautiful people to sleep with, for sure. Right. Like that hasn't been a problem, but are any of them like worthy of long-term romance? I don't think so, you know, or things like that. It's like, they're more distracting than anything. It's fun. It's Venus. It's pleasurable, but it's not like getting me anywhere.
It's not like satisfying that Jupiter in the 7th that really wants that kind of committed relationship or important significant other.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the way I like to think about them. And it helps also add some humor to it. And thinking about your out of sect planets and how they be doing you dirty sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's something that Austin kind of helped, you know, put into my brain to help me like understand it better. And I loved it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you want to add? Any imparting thoughts about the moon or anything else we've been discussing today?
I will just say, if you have a hard time with your moon, you're not alone. Because it's it's not easy, I think, especially if you have like body issues, body trauma. Like I have, you know, chronic illness. And I just would rather not have to think about my body or what I'm feeding it. Right. I think a lot of people probably deal with similar feelings. So you're not alone around it. I will say, like, my Saturn return really helped just kind of like slow me down enough to like pay attention to it. But yeah, just like, as long as you have the goal of getting there, like give yourself a break and just keep working towards it. I guess that's what I would say.
Awesome. Kirah, where can we find you? And is there anything that you are working on that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so I'm in this weird position right now when it comes to my Instagram handles because I was just about to switch my Instagram handle
Mm-hmm.
and someone took it.
Oh no.
And I bought a whole URL that matched the Instagram handle. And I don't really know what to do about that right now. I'm like waiting for them to see my
Oh
Instagram message and
geez.
hopefully let me have it.
You DM them and you were like, can I please have this
Yeah,
Instagram
they
handle?
used it for their newborn baby like
Oh
pictures.
wow.
So it's like a private account and I'm just like, please let me have it. Like,
Mm,
so I don't know, but right now it's at the astrology. Hopefully, eventually, well, I will be changing my Twitter and all my other handles to Kirah.world. So that will be my new URL, Kirah.world, ORLD. And my podcast, Cosmic Guidance for All. It'll be the same place, if you subscribe to the
mm-hmm.
astrology show, you'll still be subscribed and
It'll be
you'll
on the
get
same
it.
feed.
It'll be on the same
Nice.
feed. Yeah. But yeah, Cosmic Guidance for All is my new podcast name, and I'm excited about it. And then I'm also launching Jove's House, which is my new membership.
Mm,
Um, so I used to have a membership called the 11th House, closed that down and opening something kind of similar, but a little different called Jove's House. Similar name, as you can tell.
mm-hmm.
And basically, I host a reading swap every month for members and a monthly gathering for members too. So you can come and, I answer questions. I talk about the astrology for a bit, but the best part is I put people into breakout rooms, and you get to like actually talk to other astrologers and speak the language and meet people. And you'll also have access to my private Instagram feed or account, which is at Jove's House. And I'll be doing live streams there and posting, private content for subscribers. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Jove's House, it's going to be really fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, I
I'll be
think
sure
that's
to
it.
link all that in the show notes. And I want to say if Job's house is anything like the 11th house, I'm sure it will be very successful and useful for people, because I learned about, so John, who was on this episode, who was on this podcast for the Aquarius Moon episode, I learned about his and Jared and Deja's podcast from you doing you did like a event about
Venusian
the 11th
afternoons.
house.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you talked about their
That
podcast,
right. Okay. Okay.
Triplicity. And so like they have a whole podcast and they met through the 11th house, which I thought was so
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah, there's been so many awesome connections happening through the 11th house. So similar thing with Jove's house. It's just cheaper, honestly. Like the 11th house is $44 a month. Jove's house is sliding scale, $11 or $22 a month. So I wanted to make it more accessible and a little bit less stressful for me on a day-to-day basis.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited about it. And the app, it's not going to be released anytime soon, but in case you're listening to this in the future when it is released, it's called Stars Align. It's more than just a dating app. It's an app to match you up with people in general. So you can browse as just for friends, you can browse romantically, you can do both. And I'm really stoked about it. We're at the very beginning stages, and I'm still creating the algorithm and everything, but it's going to be awesome. So keep
And
an
it's
eye out for
an
it.
astro focused app.
Yep. It's
Awesome.
basically an astrology focused dating app.
So cool. Yeah, I think one of the most important parts, like to learning astrology, again, like speaking the language, is having other people to speak it with. So all these
Exactly.
tools that connect people, I think, is so like useful and helpful for people.
Yeah. I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to spread the good word of traditional astrology.
Yeah. Well, I'm
It's my
happy.
ninth house stuff.
Yeah, I'm happy I could be a little part of that today. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experience and talking with me.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Take care, Kirah. Talk to you soon.
You too.
To support the show by donating or becoming a member, please visit my website, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to contact me via my website or email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to astrologers and resources that we touched on in this episode. Thanks. See you next time.